Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is an Asus Eee Pad Slider, which is a 10-inch Android tablet with a 1280 by 800 pixel display, NVIDIA Tegra 2 dual-core processor, and a slide-out keyboard, which is why it's called the Slider. So the defining characteristic is probably that keyboard, and we'll show you a little bit more about how that works in a minute. But first, let's just take a quick look around the hardware. We've got a USB port here, full-size USB, headphone jack, full-size HDMI, a proprietary USB cable for connecting to your computer, volume buttons, and a power button, and a micro SD card slot. And that's pretty much it for the expansion ports, but it's actually more than you get on a lot of tablets. And that full-size USB port means that if you use this in sort of laptop mode, it really does sort of start to feel like a laptop, because you can use a mouse and the keyboard at the same time. That said, the defining characteristic, the keyboard, really could be a little bit better. It's a very small keyboard, the keys are a little bit cramped, and when I tell people when they're looking at things like 10-inch netbooks that they'll probably get used to the keyboard, this is actually smaller than a netbook keyboard. And part of the problem too is that since this is really not meant to be a primary device, this is a secondary device, odds are you're using another keyboard in your life. So if you have a laptop or a desktop computer and you're used to typing on that, and then you come to using this, it's always going to feel a little bit cramped, even after you do start to get used to it, or at least I think so. Using a mouse is nice, but certain Android applications are really designed for touch input, so you're going to find yourself reaching up to the screen. And the bigger problem, besides the cramped keyboard, is the fact that input just could be a little bit better. I mean, it's perfectly fine for doing basic typing like entering URLs, and the web browser and web browsing experience is pretty good when you're doing that. But when you switch to applications like, say, the WordPress application, I've noticed that there are some problems. So for instance, when I type a lot of text, oh, I made a mistake, need to go back, I've noticed that for some reason it deletes 2 characters at a time instead of 1 character. And so that can be really frustrating because you sort of keep going back and back and back as you try to correct the changes that you make by hitting the backspace key in the first place. So I started actually writing the text version of this review for Liliputing.com on this keyboard, but after a couple of paragraphs I just really didn't want to deal with it anymore. So it's better than having no keyboard at all, and if you're somebody who feels like you just can't get into this whole tablet idea because you're looking for a device that does have a keyboard, then this Slider is really one of the only options available, but it's not really a laptop replacement, not only because Google Android can't run Windows applications if you wanted to be able to run those, but because the keyboard is just not really sufficient. You could theoretically use that full-size USB port to plug in a full-sized keyboard, but that would defeat the purpose of having a tablet. The screen is pretty good, but it is glossy. So you can see as I turn it towards a bright window, we get a fair amount of glare here. The mechanism for sliding up and down is pretty sturdy, so it seems like something you'd have to worry is going to break, but it really does seem like it's meant to go for thousands and thousands of opening and closing sessions without breaking. It's got a very sturdy metal piece here. Or hard plastic, I'm not quite sure which, but either way it doesn't feel like it's going to break. One problem is that the screen only opens to a 45-degree angle. It's not adjustable, you can't tilt it forward or back like you would a normal laptop display, but because the IPS screen has wide viewing angles, you can view text reasonably well from a number of different angles. So text, pictures, graphics, videos, they all look pretty good. Even if you have this positioned up high or down low. So that 45-degree angle isn't as big a problem as it might otherwise be, but it is a little bit unusual to have this sort of device and not be able to adjust the screen at all. One thing that is very strange is that the speakers are built in right here under the display. And what that means is when the display is up, then the speakers are reasonably loud and clear. There's not a lot of bass, but that's par for the course with small devices like this. But when you put this down, the speakers actually become very muffled sounding. It's like you're listening to somebody talking with their hands over their mouth. So that's a little bit of an unusual choice. Overall, because of the keyboard, this is a little bit heavier than most 10-inch tablets. It weighs around 2 pounds, as opposed to many that are now 1.3 or 1.5 pounds. Feels fairly comfortable to hold with two hands, but it's going to be even more comfortable to hold if you place it down, balancing it on a table or your lap or whatever else. Very kind of unwieldy to hold with one hand in portrait mode. So while you could use this to do things like reading books, it's the screen is kind of large for an ebook reader, and the user experience is really kind of uncomfortable when you have to hold something that weighs 2 pounds. It's like using a very heavy hardcover book. In terms of size, I just wanted to give you a couple of other quick comparisons to other devices. We've got an HP touchpad tablet with a 9.7-inch display. You can see it's much thinner and doesn't take up as much space, but it's actually a little bit wider. And that's what I look like with my messy hair right now. We've got a smaller device like the Barnes & Noble Nook tablet. This has a 7-inch screen, so it's no surprise that it's significantly smaller and lighter. Or we can also compare it to a netbook. And this is sort of an interesting comparison because this is an Asus netbook from 2008, so you can sort of see where the company has gone in the last couple of years. So what we have here is a EPC 1000H compared with the Eee Pad Slider. They both have 10-inch displays, but the Slider has a 1280 by 800 pixel display, weighs about 2 pounds. This guy weighs around 3 pounds and has a full-sized, 90-something% size keyboard, much larger and easier to use, and runs Windows XP, Linux, other operating systems. So overall, the experience, I think, of doing more common Windows-type tasks is probably better on the EPC, and you've got a touchpad built in, where there's no touchpad here. But the Slider is definitely a more portable device, and it can run Android applications, weighs less, has better battery life at around 8.5 hours compared with 4 or 5 hours. So, you know, we've sort of got the before and after here, but I think that there's some people who might still prefer a before. Fortunately, Asus has come a long way. This just happens to be the one netbook I happen to have in the house right now. Their newer netbooks are smaller and a little bit lighter and easier to take with you. But I just wanted to give you a quick video overview and review of the Asus Eee Pad Slider, which is a 10-inch tablet with a pull-out keyboard, and one of the only devices in its class that has that kind of keyboard. I wish it was a better keyboard. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing.